something.
I've been told that I look like the guy that plays the Hulk, Mark Ruffalo. And I actually live in the town that he was born in.
This feels like a trap right now. Like, I'm not really sure what to say. Like, do you want to look like him? Do you not want to look like him?
What I think people mean is like before he transforms into the Hulk. So what people are...
Right, sure. I didn't think that much was clear. Yeah. Thank you, Fellipe.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So what they're not telling me is, Fellipe, you're in such great shape, like the Hulk. Yeah. They're saying, no, you look like the other guy who's like pretty useless on the Avengers until he gets angry. Yeah,
that guy.
Anyways.
Welcome to Foreword, a TEDS faculty podcast. I'm Michelle Knight.
And I'm Fellipe Deauville.
Today, we are super excited to welcome Dr. President Felix Theonugraha at Western Theological Seminary. Felix is a TEDS alum and a former VP for Student Life here at TIU. Fellipe and I both had the pleasure of working with and learning from him when he was here on campus. So welcome, Felix. We're so glad you're here with us.
Thank you. It's a privilege for me to be here with you both.
It's fun. Yeah. I mean, while you're not the first president to be on this podcast, you are certainly the first one to be on the podcast in the studio.
In the studio, yeah.
Though you are technically not in the studio, which is perhaps for the best, because I'm just not sure all of your Secret Service agents could have fit in this small studio. So this is for the best.
Yeah, as president, do you drive around with like a barricade of cars, armed cars and things like that, you know, black SUVs, I'm assuming. Is that how it goes?
You know, it's my 2008 Toyota Sienna.
But it's black, right? It's black. It looks very professional. We were talking earlier. I've actually never been the president of anything. And as like an achiever, just kind of by personality, as I look back on my life, I feel like maybe I failed. I was treasurer of the French Club, and I feel like that's important.
Yeah, I don't think I've been the president of anything.
But you were on student government here at TEDS.
That's right. So my experience with Felix is that I was the vice president of academics here at TEDS, which is probably the most dignified title I've ever had.
It's very prestigious.
Yeah, although I technically didn't earn it. My friend James just was like, hey, I'm going off to get married. Will you take over for me? And I said, sure.
Yeah. And you assumed the throne.
That's right. I didn't consolidate any power or anything, but it's, yeah.
Well, I think you tried, Fellipe.
I did. I failed, actually. I didn't win. But that's okay. Really that's okay. Somebody more qualified got it.
Do you have any excellent stories about Felix from those days?
Excellent stories. Well, I mean, Felix just revealed to me that he has a picture of me in his house.
Oh, well, that's lovely.
Do you want to share about that, Felix?
I mean, it was fun. I got to work with the student government when I was the dean of students for TED. So I had you and Zax Gaia and Susie Sang and Yuli Lee over, I think, for an end of the year celebration. So it was a lot of fun. It was fun. It's the four of you. It's two pictures. I can even send it to you. It's a picture of you, the four of you, sitting very nicely and posing, in a very dignified way. And I think the four of you trying to get up at the same time and like half collapsing into each other.
That sounds right.
Days.
That's perfect.
That's perfect. Yeah.
I love that.
Oh, I'd love to see those. Those are good times. Those are good times.
Yeah, that was a good time. And Michelle, I want to say, even you were one of those students that like you didn't get into enough trouble to like make it into our office, but you were so accomplished academically and in terms of your passion for teaching. I mean, you were teaching Hebrew as a student.
That's true.
If I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So
I don't think ATS lets us do that anymore.
They don't do that anymore.
They don't let us do that anymore.
You've got plenty of time to be the president of something.
Yeah.
I mean, do you know what you would want if you could be president of anything?
Well, actually, right at this moment, that sounds exhausting.
Yeah.
Honestly.
You can create something. I normally use the president of the Foreword host club.
Wow.
I like it. I like where that's going.
All right.
I like it.
Yeah. Well, with all that joking aside, we generally want to know, Felix, what's it like to be the president of a seminary? What are the challenges, the joys? How have you found it to be?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think it's been a lot of fun. It has brought me a lot of joy. It's been really exciting to get to know a different institution, a school that has a long denominational history.
Yeah.
Having spent 17 years at Trinity, it was really exciting to kind of see how God is at work in another part of the church.
Yeah.
And so coming here to Western Theological Seminary, getting to know the faculty, the staff, the students, what motivates them, what keeps them here, the passion that they bring to the task of teaching and learning, to meet just alumni all over the country and the world who have been formed at Western Theological Seminary, and to just continue to see how God is using them. It's been a lot of fun.
That must be gratifying.
And so, I feel myself, year after, with every passing year, just falling more and more in love with the school and the community here. So that's been a lot of fun. And I think I would say that's probably the top joy of being the president of a school.
And what have you found challenging? I mean, obviously, you've been president at a very challenging time for many different institutions. So you don't have to get into those weeds if you don't want. But I mean, obviously, there are things that you have to overcome. What kinds of things have you found so challenging by it, or in the position?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, this may be a bit of a cliche, but the pandemic certainly has thrown a wrench into everything, right?
Yeah.
So it was March 13, 2020, when we gathered for our last day on campus, in person, and we had chapel, and we're walking out of chapel, and I remember a couple of students were in tears. Like, they had figured out that this is not good, and we may not be back for the rest of the semester.
Oh, wow.
And I remember going up to them and going, hey, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's going to be fine.
Yeah.
Like, we'll come back. And I'll open the school for one day, the end of the semester, so we can worship one more time, if I have to. And then, like 2 weeks later, sending an email going, about that. Not only are we not able to come back, like, we're postponing commencement, and just, I think that, that was a challenge that none of us saw coming, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that first year, it felt really incomplete. We didn't hold a commencement until this past May. And so it really took 2 years to feel like one full year kind of came together.
Yeah.
And then probably the other thing, when I was in the interview process, I met with the search firm, and we were having dinner at a restaurant. And at one point, I was just asking him, what would it be like? What should I know about becoming a president of an institution if this were to continue? And he said, give me a second. And so he got up and walked around the table and stood behind me. And he said, at some point in your presidency, you're going to feel this. And he put both his hands on my shoulders and just pushed really hard. And he was a strong guy. And just pushed down on my shoulder. And I was like, ugh, And he said, you're going to feel this weight like you've never felt before.
Wow.
And honestly, in that moment, I thought, I've been in higher ed administration for 10 plus years. I've gone through crises. I've gone through emergency situations.
Yeah,
like, it's not gonna. I'm going to be familiar with that feeling, and honestly, I wasn't. There's a different level of responsibility that you feel when you're the president of a school, where that certain decisions are yours to make, and whether it goes this way or that way, it ultimately comes down to you and what you decide. And everyone's waiting for you to make the decision, and that whatever happens is going to be your responsibility.
Oh my days!
And that is a feeling that is hard to just capture until you've been in it.
Right.
You know what, Felix, as somebody who's been kind of watching you lead from afar, it's been really neat to see how you have handled that burden and how you have grown in that role and how you are serving that school so faithfully. So at least as outsiders, we are really impressed with your leadership and we're so grateful you're there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, and kind of within that vein, we were talking about you being a president, but how did you get here? What was it? How has God shaped you and your passions? What's your story like? How do you get from where you began to being there at Western? We'd love to hear kind of how that developed.
Sure. I was telling my son the other day, when I was at TEDS, I think after my second year, my dad encouraged me to get a PhD.
Okay.
And it's just like a stereotypically like Asian dad thing to do, right? I'm like, Dad, I'm not even done with my master's. You're already like onto the PhD thing. And I remember having like a huge argument with him and basically making the case that you don't need to have a PhD for the Lord to use you in a meaningful way in the church.
Yeah.
And I still believe that.
Of course.
But along the way, I started working at Trinity and ended up getting my PhD. And I look back at that and I thought, wow, God was using my dad to kind of prepare me for something that just was not at all on my mind or on my heart.
Yeah.
And so in a lot of ways, my dad is an influence. And then also Trinity was a major factor. When I finished my MDiv, I was invited to apply for the Associate Dean of Students position. And up till that point, I sensed a deep call to pastoral ministry. I was planning to go back to California and serve as a pastor in the Chinese immigrant church for the English congregation. And so when this opportunity came up, I thought, this is not the calling that God has for me. And Dr. Peter Chow was my advisor. And so I had to talk it over with him. And he, used the analogy. I think it was Os Guinness. I think he credited Os Guinness of coming up with the analogy of your life being kind of like a train. And then, God has given you gifts, but you will pull into different stations throughout your life. And so where and how those gifts are carried out can and will look different throughout your life.
Yeah.
And so he asked me, will this role allow you to use your pastoral gifts? And when you think about the role of, associate dean of students,
yeah.
In many ways, you're the pastor, you're providing pastoral care to students, right?
100%.
And so that allowed me to make the connection and thought, okay, maybe this is how God is going to utilize the calling and the gifts that He has given to me. And that started the journey into higher ed administration. I found out that I enjoyed it. I loved it. In the early days, I just loved being able to cut through the red tapes. The red tape for students. Students come to my office and they go, "I'm experiencing this difficulty," and I'm like, "Let me just. This is so easy to fix. Let me just make 3 phone calls and resolve it for you."
We need people like you.
So I think that was part of the fun, in the beginning. And then over the years, just realizing that, institutions matter.
Yeah.
And, we live in a time where, institutions have, is going through a rough patch because of, integrity issues and maybe being motivated by expediency instead of continue being mission driven and whatnot. But institutions continue to shape us. And I sense that it's a worthwhile calling to give my life to strengthening institutions, and so that kind of what led me to get a PhD and eventually to pursue a vocation in institutions. So
That's super cool.
Yeah, well, that's actually a really nice segue into something that we would love to ask you about, which is a bit more of a bigger picture question about institutions, specifically about seminaries. I mean, here you are, the president of a seminary. We work at a seminary. We'd love to hear more from you about what do you think the role of a seminary is? And maybe to make it a bit more narrow and more specific, what do you think the role of an American seminary, a seminary in the United States is? But also, what do you envision? You've mentioned one of the joys of being president of Western is to see the global impact of your institution. What do you think the role of a seminary is globally speaking as well? And do you see those two roles interacting with one another? And if so, how? You can take that whatever direction you'd like.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's a long and that requires like hours of conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I have some maybe just emerging thoughts, kind of about seminaries in general. I mean, there are so many people that have, dedicated their life to leading seminaries or working with seminaries that I feel like I'm just trying to learn from them and their wisdom and kind of stand on their shoulders. I think one of the things that we have really tried to wrestle with here at Western is, what can we do uniquely as a theological education institution that that maybe a church or a nonprofit organization can't do, right?
Yeah.
I think what it comes down to is that we're an educational resource for the church. So, while we care about forming students, about developing a deep, a discipleship life in our students, we have to do it with a particular attention to the fact that we are an educational institution that we teach, so we must do so with excellence and with passion.
Yeah.
So I think that's I think that situates seminaries in uniquely kind of in the constellation of Christian ministries and church and the likes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think for us specifically, we have really honed in on the idea of formation. We it's a whole person formation, engaging the head, the heart, the hand.
Yeah.
Loving the Lord your God with your heart, soul, and mind, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that was part of my convocation address earlier this week, is that as a school, we care about the formation of the whole person, but as a school, we want to pay particular attention to what does it mean to love the Lord your God with all your mind? And so that means that approaching our teaching and learning as an act of worship, from Romans 1 and 2. But also, we had a faculty retreat last week, and our faculty had an inspired conversation about what does it mean to form our students through the classroom. And I remember one of the faculty members, saying, when we teach, are we teaching with the awareness that we are teaching students about the God who is in the room? And another faculty member said, can our teaching be an act of prayer? What does that look like? Does our teaching lead to mercy moments of confession, moments of worship? And I remember taking a class at Trinity where it was a systematic theology class, and we would be listening to a lecture and taking notes and everything like that, and all of a sudden I was taking notes and I realized, the professor just started praying. I mean, he was just so moved by what he was teaching us that he just started praying and praising God. And at other times he would break out into a hymn and he just started singing in the middle of the class. And it was such a good example and a reminder for me, of what that how our study and our teaching and learning can be an act of worship as well. So, we're delving into that. Daniel Alashire, who was the executive director of Association of Theological Schools, just wrote this book, Beyond Profession, right? So we read it as a leadership team, and he talked a lot about, cultivating a knowledge of God, knowing God, but then also the relational, moral, ethical, affectional development that schools ought to focus on. Especially as, we are entering, we're in the season when the moral failures and the compromise and integrity of Christian leaders have led to a growing distrust of clergy and pastors in the United States. And so I think that's a significant role that theological schools ought to engage with. So,
Well, I just wanted to follow up, if it's all right. The kind of formative view of education that you've championed, and as you said, we were actually reading that book around here too. And I know that ATS has started using, the Association of Theological Schools has started using this language of formation a little more prominently. I think it's such a helpful move for us as we think about. It's really easy to look at the seminary and kind of say, maybe your time is done. Like, what do you have to offer that YouTube or the internet or this, that, and the other can offer? And I think it's been helpful for all of us to realize there are some people for whom those other sources of learning are going to really be sufficient for what they need. But what a seminary really does uniquely offer is a moment for us to grow together. And shape each other in a way that isn't quite possible anywhere else, because you are formed in the church in a very special and important way. But when you are learning together in a seminary, that formation is a little bit different. And it's a little bit more about forming your thought processes and forming the way that you ask questions and those sorts of things. And those are really difficult to replicate in other settings. And so I really feel like you've done a great job pinpointing kind of what the seminary has to offer the world that we are in.
Yeah. No, I love that image of loving God with your mind. It's not something you typically think about. A place from which you love is your mind. Usually you associate love with the heart, with the emotions and so on. Right. But I love that completeness that you're trying to inculcate in your institution. That's really lovely. What would you see so many good and encouraging things. Where would you like seminaries to go? You can, if you could snap your finger today, like Thanos in the Avengers or something like that, and something would change.
But not like Thanos.
But maybe not like, just the snapping bit, not the other bits. If you had the Tesseract, what would you change if you could inculcate something good instantly? What would it be?
Fellipe, if I can take a little detour, aren't you you're the big Marvel fan, aren't you?
I mean, I like a lot of things. I do like Marvel, yeah. I might not be the biggest, though. I'm not sure.
That's not the first Marvel reference he's made today, though. So I think that you might be onto something.
I've been told that I look like the guy that plays the Hulk, Mark Ruffalo. And I actually live in the town that he was born in.
This feels like a trap right now. Like, I'm not really sure what to say. Like, do you want to look like him? Do you not want to look like him?
What I think people mean is like before he transforms into the Hulk. So what people are...
Right, sure. I didn't think that much was clear. Thank you, Fellipe.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So what they're not telling me is, Fellipe, you're in such great shape, like the Hulk. They're saying, no, you look like the other guy who's like pretty useless on the Avengers until he gets angry. Yeah, that guy. Anyways.
All right, sorry about that detour.
Back to finger snapping, yeah. No, those are allowed. That's fine.
That's a really thoughtful question. I feel like we're in this season, right, where the name of Christ and the church, it has fallen to disrepute. You can't go every more than a few days without hearing about some kind of a dysfunction or pastors who have abused or misused their authority, power, the stories of immorality, that's come out. And so one of the things that we have really wrestled with at Western, we kind of spent some time this summer just engaging with various churches, denominations, networks, and to just ask them, what is God doing in your in your neck of the woods, in your denomination, in your organization, and what do you desire for future pastors? Yeah, and I think there were two themes that emerge. One is to expand our imagination on healthy ministry. I think up till this point, oftentimes I think for a lot of times, and not for everyone, but I think in kind of the broader Christian culture, we assess healthy or successful ministry with the size of the building, the number of the people in the pews, in the chairs, maybe the quality of excitement of the worship services, the number of influencers, the number of followers you may have on Twitter, and the number of downloads you have on YouTube and whatnot, and what kind of conferences you get to get invited to speak in, right? Speak at, and those are great and wonderful, but that's not the end all be all of what a healthy, faithful, maybe even successful, ministry look like. And so we have really kind of made a considered effort at Western to talk about faithfulness as kind of that in that Eugene Peterson vision of a long obedience in the same direction.
I love that image.
Awesome.
I love it.
So, and do you know your flock? Do you know God? First and foremost, do you yourself know God? As you stand in front of your congregation, inviting them into a relationship with God, are you the kind of person? Are you the kind of pastor? Are you the kind of woman Are you the kind of man that yourself know God?
Yeah.
So that you can invite people into an experience with God that you, out of your own sense of experiencing God. And so resisting kind of some of the way that we label or we want to measure, success.
Yeah.
And just encouraging our students to be faithful to God and to the people that God has entrusted into your care.
So
and that's tough because in our kind of data-driven world, it's really hard to measure like qualitative, like spiritual growth.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Oh, totally. We try really
100%.
hard.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just much easier, even for a seminary, right? It's just much easier to count head count.
Yeah.
Number of students, number of countries that your students come from, things like that.
Yeah.
But that's just PR.
Absolutely.
How are our people growing as they and how are we forming our students to help their congregations grow and go deeper in their discipleship?
Yeah.
Beautiful.
I think that's one. I think the other one is just the kind of in our conversations is to expand the demographic of people that we think of when we think about ministers and Christian leaders.
Yeah.
And that specifically has to do, with diversity, the growing kind of racial ethnic diversity in the United States.
Yeah.
Thinking about access to theological education, both for them and going back to your earlier question, Fellipe, in response to the global church, it's no longer rising; it's here.
Yeah. Right. 100%.
It's here. And what does it mean for us to ethically and responsibly and intentionally engage with the global church and not simply repeat some of the old patterns of engagement when it comes to racial ethnic minorities, but as well as the presence of world Christianity around the world.
Yeah.
Oh, that's terrific. That's terrific. Yeah.
You've already started to kind of explore some of the challenges that you are trying to address as you think about higher education, as you think about the seminary. But even if we spoke kind of beyond the seminary and just kind of as people who care for the local church in some capacity, we are, whether we do this well or not, ideally, we're always anticipating what's coming next because we're not training, we're very rarely training people to minister today. We're very frequently training people to minister in 10 or 15 years. And so you have kind of the difficult job, I guess, of anticipating and casting that vision for the future a little bit and thinking ahead. And as you think ahead, and I mean, I recognize this is a very difficult question, and I'm not even sure I have a good answer to it. I'm sure I don't have a good answer. That's why you have your job and I have mine. But what challenges you anticipate? I mean, you've already spoke to some, and so maybe we've gotten into this a little bit, but what challenges do you anticipate? What challenges do we need to be considering as we are helping people grow in whatever capacity within the worldwide church?
Yeah. I think one of the things that I learned is that as an administrator, you live in the realm of possibility.
Yeah.
And I think, Michelle, you're absolutely right on. You just kind of think about, okay, there's all these things that are happening, and what does it look like for us to be forming students for ministry for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years?
Yeah.
And not for the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, right?
Yeah.
As great as that may be. And I think part of the difficulty is that those last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, they have been the forces, both culturally and within the church, ecclesiologically, they have formed us, shaped us, and develop our and form our instincts.
Yeah.
So there needs to be an unlearning. And not to say that we have to become, not to say that all those forces are deforming. Some of them are good.
Absolutely.
And they should remain. But you almost have to develop a kind of self-awareness as individuals, but also as an institution to say, these are the things that have been really helpful.
Yeah.
Let's hang on to the essence. But let's imagine what it will look like kind of in this next few decades.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, we want to form and graduate students whose ministry can be sustainable in the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Right?
It's so hard.
So,
Yeah.
I have alluded to, I think the racial ethnic diversity is a major issue.
Yeah.
And when I talk about that, when we talk about that at Western, it's not just simply about bringing more students of color to campus.
Yeah.
It's actually about preparing all of our students, because their ministry context, be it the church, in nonprofit organization, or be even in businesses, in law firms, and in medical fields, wherever, in chaplaincy, whatever it is, they'll be surrounded with a rapidly growing diverse community that would be that are very different than the context that they grew up in.
Yeah.
And so talking about racial ethnic diversity and preparing students for a diverse ministry context is something that is beneficial to all. Not just kind of students of color.
Right.
And we felt that way by even recruiting then faculty of color, is that we have this Hispanic ministry program that's growing leaps and bounds. But we made the commitment as a school to say that we don't want this Hispanic ministry program to just simply be an appendage to the institution. We want the courses in our Spanish language Hispanic ministry program to be taught by our core faculty. And that means that we hire professors who can teach in both programs. And that takes a commitment from the board to say yes, let's make those kinds of changes. And I'm glad that our board is supportive of that. I think when it comes to the world Christianity, the global church, I mean, Dr. Tianu, he is like my North Star, right?
Ours too.
And in that book, in the volume Globalizing Theology, he wrote that first chapter. I think the phrase that has haunted me ever since I read it is the part where he talked about the posture of the West, that posture itself as purveyors of raw, exotic intellectual material from the rest of the world, and our posture, that we look at these exotic intellectual material as unsuitable for consumption until it has been thoroughly processed by the West.
Wow.
And to me, we need to be different. We need to say, if we acknowledge that the Holy Spirit is at work around the world, and the church is growing, people are coming to the Lord, what does it mean for us to listen to this to their understanding of the Spirit's work, of Scripture, of theology? Because they're developing it out of their current local context. And that may be our understanding, 2,000 years or not, is limited by our own location as well.
Absolutely.
And that we need to embrace the full breadth and depth of the witness of the global church. So what does it mean to engage with that, kind of as equal partners, but maybe also as students to the global church and learn from Christians from around the world.
What you're saying there reminds me of what is said at the end of the book of Acts, where the things pertaining to Christ were not done in a corner. And so often we act as if they were not only done in a corner, but only in our corner, right? But what you're describing seems so interesting, because it expands. It takes the fullness of the room, not just the corner. So that's so encouraging.
Amen. And I think the other thing, probably the one that more recently has kind of just, I don't have the answer to this either. But I think the last 18 months with the pandemic, with the election and everything like that, it's just kind of the continuing, it's just the growth of kind of litmus test Christianity. And there's no end to that litmus test. I never thought that I could have never envisioned masks or vaccines, being a litmus test of whether you are a person of faith or a person of fear. And so I wrestle with that. One of the advice that I received earlier on is to never talk about politics, because you are bound to offend 50% of the people who are listening to you.
50 is a good number, right? If you're lucky, it's only 50%, right?
Right. And so, our dean, Kristen Johnson, she's written a lot about political discipleship. And we wonder that actually by not talking about politics, we have kind of abdicated our responsibility when it comes to political discipleship, that maybe we ought to talk about it a little more so that we can actually be a factor in helping shape the imagination of Christians, of the church.
That's right.
When it comes to political engagement.
Yeah. Felix, that's so helpful and inspiring.
It is.
I'm so grateful. And I hate to do this to us, but I'm actually going to have to draw this to a close. I could talk to you about this for years, I think.
Oh my gosh.
This has been so helpful. But the listeners, they stop listening after 30 minutes and we're past that.
Right.
So we gotta I'm kidding. I didn't mean to blame you, listeners. You guys are awesome. You're so cool. But as we say, that's just the foreword. We are so glad that we could have Felix join us today on the podcast. Felix was a part of the MDiv program here, and then he did the educational studies PhD here at TEDS, which is a really awesome program. And Felix is a shining example of the amazing students we've had gone through there and the amazing work they're doing in the world. So thank you for making us look good, if I may.
President.
But seriously, thank you for your example of how you can use what you have done in a seminary setting and kind of think creatively about how to serve the church. So thank you for that. So thank you, Felix, for being a part of this. We also want to go ahead and thank our producer, Curtis, for making us look good, and to Lauren, our graduate assistant, for tirelessly helping us put this all together. But especially, we want to thank you, listeners, and viewers, for tuning in, for clicking on that link and joining us. We are so grateful that you care about TEDS, that you care about our alumni, that you care about God's church, and that you are coming and listening and sharing in this conversation with us. So thank you. I'm Michelle Knight.
I'm Fellipe Dovale.
Thanks, guys.
Foreword is a podcast hosted by faculty at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. The views expressed by the hosts and guests of Foreword do not necessarily represent the views of Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. You can subscribe to our newest episode on your preferred podcast app or at forewordpodcast.com. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Foreword Podcast to get updates and additional links to content. Trinity Evangelical Divinity School is located 25 miles north of Chicago with extension sites across the country and online. Trinity educates men and women to engage in God's redemptive work in the world by cultivating academic excellence, Christian faithfulness, and lifelong learning. You can find more information at teds.edu.